Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating article, one you sent over from The Guardian. It's titled, "Trump is Terrified of Black Culture, but Not for the Reasons You Think."
Yeah, it's quite a provocative title.
It really is. And our mission today is to, go beyond just the headlines. We want to explore the deeper historical stuff, the ideological roots of what people often call the culture wars, especially when it concerns Black arts and institutions.
Right.
This deep dive, we think, will show why some actions, particularly those taken against cultural bodies, might not really be about diversity in the way we usually talk about it. It might be about something, well, more fundamental. Maybe even, as the article suggests, terrifying from a certain perspective.
And what's so interesting is how the piece connects these historical moments and cultural movements that seem, pretty separate on the surface.
Totally.
But it uses them to light up this core ideological fight. We'll trace a line basically from the 1930s right up to today.
Looking at how culture itself can be, well, a political weapon.
Exactly, a weapon.
Okay, so to really get into the article's argument, we should probably rewind a bit. Let's start with a really powerful moment. The 1936 Berlin Olympics.
Oh.
Jesse Owens, obviously.
A huge moment. Everyone knows his name.
We all know about his incredible triumph, yeah. But the article points out something specific, often overlooked, about why his victory mattered so much then.
Indeed. I mean, his sheer athleticism was just a humiliation for the Nazi regime, right there on their home turf.
Right.
Hitler apparently watched Owens win his first event, then just got up and left the arena, couldn't stand watching Aryan athletes fail against him.
Wow.
And that departure, the article argues, was this kind of reluctant admission, wasn't it?
An admission of what exactly?
That this whole idea of European physical superiority, which had been like a pillar of racial ideology since the 15th century, it was just shown to be false.
Proven wrong. Quantifiably.
Black dominance on the track became this undeniable fact, right there for the world to see.
So Owens's win, it wasn't just about the medals, was it? The article really frames it as this direct ideological blow. It smashed a core belief about race.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about sports either. You mentioned the 1930s Nazis. They also started that synchronization campaign the article talks about.
Yeah, synchronization. What did that involve?
Basically trying to force all the fine arts, theater, literature, even architecture and media to line up with Nazi propaganda.
And the article notes this wasn't unique to the Third Reich, right? This sort of cultural control.
No, not at all. If you look at the bigger picture, you see that pattern. European colonizers, they almost always expanded their empires partly by stealing or destroying the cultures they subjugated.
And replacing it with their own narrative.
Exactly. Pushing their own cultural superiority through propaganda. The article argues that really, since the World Wars, Western cultural imperialism has been kind of hedged on that perfectly rigged game.
A rigged game? How so?
Where things produced by white culture are automatically called significant because, well, white intellectual arbiters tell us that they are. That's a direct quote.
Okay, but then the article suggests things got even more intense a few decades later, right around the late 1960s.
Yeah, things shifted. Fewer than 40 years after Owens, those Western empires were starting to lose their grip, culturally speaking.
And in the U.S.?
The Black freedom struggle was igniting this huge movement for African-American identity, and it was linked, importantly, to independence movements happening across Africa and the diaspora.
Which led to the Black arts movement. BAM!
And BAM, exactly. And that raises the question, what was BAM really about? What was its core aim?
Good question.
Well, it was this really concerted effort, to transform the whole artistic and cultural scene within Black politics, scholarship, organizations.
Hitting into
a creative explosion, all centered on Black life, Black experience. BAM basically birthed a new Black consciousness.
Based on what?
Based on self-determination. And aimed squarely at knocking down those claims of white cultural supremacy. It asked a fundamental question.
Which was?
Why should any white-controlled institution be qualified to judge art made for Black people by Black people?
It's a radical question.
Yeah.
The article says BAM was radically forged, moving away from accepting white cultural supremacy, even showing disinterest in white approval.
Completely disinterested.
So if they weren't looking for that external validation, what did they do instead?
They built their own institutions. This is absolutely crucial.
Like what kind of institutions?
Think about it. Bookstores, publishing houses, theaters, galleries, museums, cultural centers, even scholarly journals like The Black Scholar and Black World. They became the main places for intellectual discussion.
Wow.
They started Black studies programs, developed curricula. The movement just knew that Black cultural production needed Black intellectual production to give it value and meaning.
And Malcolm X's influence is really highlighted here in the article, isn't it?
Absolutely central. BAM grew directly out of his ideological shift towards Black
Or
nationalism.
so.
He insisted Black people were a nation within a nation, with a cultural identity rooted in the African diaspora, not in trying to assimilate into white America.
So not integration, but self-definition.
Exactly. Larry Neal, one of the key theorists, talked about needing a Black cultural thrust, building independent Black institutions, and needing a Black theory for social change.
Which led to...
Black is beautiful. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a declaration of cultural independence.
And this wasn't just theoretical, right? The article mentions a lot of artists involved.
Oh, tons. Both famous names and really foundational figures. People like Mary Baraka, Gwendolyn Brooks, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez,
Vance Baldwin, Maya Angelou.
Gil Scott Heron, and even mainstream artists, think John Coltrane, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Nina Simone. They use their platforms, their art, to amplify Black consciousness and liberation.
But the article stresses these weren't like civil rights campaigns focused on integration.
No, that's a key distinction. BAM's goal wasn't just style or visibility or simple representation. They understood that the art itself needed to be protected, safe-housed and incubated within Black communities by independent Black institutions.
Safe-housed and incubated. Interesting phrasing.
Yeah. Louis Chudsoke, who edits The Black Scholar, mentioned that the journal's founders really pushed back against elitism. They wanted to unite the academy and the street.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Then the article makes this really direct, pretty stark link between all that history and recent actions by the Trump administration, calling it a modern synchronization campaign.
It's a strong comparison.
What specific things is the article pointing to?
Well, it talks about moves in recent months and years where the administration pushed its culture wars agenda specifically to defund, demolish, or demote the institutionalization of Black arts and culture.
Examples.
Things like public takeovers of big institutions, the Kennedy Center, Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, plus high-profile firings of Black experts and leaders in federally funded places.
And book bans.
Book bans, efforts to grab more control over elite universities. It's presented as a pattern.
The article gives a prime example. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, the NMAHST, the Black Smithsonian.
Yes. That museum is so significant here. It opened just before the 2016 election.
And the article presents it as almost an embodiment of BAM's legacy.
Exactly. It meticulously flips the standard American narrative, tells it through the lens of African-descended experience.
Oh, so?
By showing how U.S. systems, economic, political, social, were fundamentally built on exploiting stolen land and people. It's not presented as some, Disney-fied tale of diversity.
The goal is different.
The goal is raising Black consciousness, directly challenging the old stories.
So given how the museum challenges that conventional narrative, how did the Trump administration react specifically?
Well, there was that executive order restoring truth and sanity to American history.
Right, I remember that.
It directly accused the NMAHC of pushing an improper and divisive race-centered ideology.
And what specifically did they object to?
One point highlighted was the museum promoting the view that race is not a biological reality, which, the article points out, is going right back to pseudoscience that was once a pillar of Aryan propaganda.
Wow, that's quite a charge. Did the order target other places too?
Yes, it also went after the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, NPG, and Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia.
And there were consequences for people involved.
Kim Sajat, the NPG's director, stepped down after Trump publicly called for her termination.
And beyond the Smithsonian, were other major cultural institutions targeted in this way the article describes?
Oh, yeah. The Kennedy Center was another clear example. Deborah Rutter, the president, was removed, and Trump loyalists were put onto the board.
Taken control.
And we saw drastic funding cuts proposed or enacted for crucial bodies like the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities.
So real impacts on funding and leadership.
Definitely. Mark Bamuthi Joseph, a VP who was fired from the Kennedy Center recently, actually went public, indicting Trump's efforts to, in his words, take down everything Black.
Take down everything Black. That's blunt.
Very.
So the article argues that while public discussion often frames all this as just an attack on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that framing misses the real point.
Yeah, it says that just adopting the anti-DEI language uncritically is kind of buying into the propaganda itself.
Well, what does that make us miss?
It makes us miss the real political power of culture itself, its ability to actually incite social change. The article argues Trump knows that culture, especially in the hands of people who've been subjugated, is a political weapon that he can't best.
A weapon he can't beat.
Yeah.
Okay, but then the article makes another really provocative point, that the focus on diversity and inclusion might actually be a concession to white supremacy, not a real challenge. That seems counterintuitive.
It does sound counterintuitive, but the argument is quite sharp.
How does it build that case?
Well, it cites Chydriel Lebouvier, who was the Guggenheim's first Black curator. She observed that many Black leaders hired by elite arts institutions after 2020 were, quote, largely ornamental.
Ornamental.
So token hires, often followed by layoffs or having their positions eliminated later, just for show, essentially. And the article even says that back in BAM's day, sometimes diversity initiatives were actually used strategically to try and dismantle Black radical politics, weaken the movement from within.
Like the Kerner Commission reference.
Exactly. The Kerner Commission was worried about Black protest movements back then, and one suggestion was basically to assimilate Black people more effectively into capitalism, sort of defang the radical edge.
So diversity as a tool of control, potentially. That's a challenging idea. And the article also critiques the idea of representation itself.
It does, deeply. It quotes Raphael Walker, an assistant professor who studies American and African-American literature.
What does Walker say?
He points out that when you're talking about representation, presentation is in the word.
Presentation. Okay.
Yeah. You're talking about presenting to someone else. Presenting for whose approval. Walker says, the Black arts movement did not give a damn about presenting Black culture for anyone else's approval.
They weren't performing for the dominant culture.
Not at all. It completely flips the power dynamic. It's about self-definition, not seeking validation.
Which brings us right back to what the article calls Trump's great fear. The real reason, it argues, behind these actions.
Yes. The logic is, if Trump, or those with his viewpoint, truly believed Black culture was inferior, why try to shut it down?
What would they do instead?
They'd leave it on display, let it exist intact. Because if it were inferior, its very existence would supposedly prove white supremacy.
Ah, I see. So the effort to demolish it, to make it disappear,
is a loud admission, as the article puts it, an admission of its power. It suggests he knows the real threat of Black culture, a threat that maybe gets missed in the usual public conversation.
Okay, so what is this real threat that the article says gets shortchanged, if it's not just about challenging narratives?
It points to the sheer, undeniable influence. Think about it. For a group that's only about 13% of the U.S. population, Black entertainers, artists, musicians, athletes, they're disproportionately some of the most famous and top-performing figures globally.
That's true.
And Black art forms, blues, jazz, hip-hop, they've done so much of the actual work of exporting Americanness as a pop culture phenomenon around the world.
So it's this massive cultural capital.
Huge capital. And from the article's viewpoint, the fear isn't just about that influence itself.
It's about what that influence could become.
Exactly. It's about the potential for that cultural capital to translate into real political power, into self-determination. That's the perceived threat.
The power to define oneself and shape one's own destiny, politically and culturally.
Precisely. And the article closes with this really powerful quote from Hakimatu Budi, who was one of BAM's founding fathers. He's talking about the movement's endgame.
What does he say?
He says, the mission is how do we become a whole people, and how do we begin to essentially tell our narrative, while at the same time move toward a level of success in this country and in the world. And we can do that. I know we can do that.
And we can do that. I know we can do that. That's powerful. And the article's final line?
Just hammers it home. Trump's great fear is knowing we can, too.
Wow. Okay. That was quite a deep dive. It really makes you rethink the whole framing of these culture wars, doesn't it?
It definitely offers a different perspective.
Understanding that history, from Jesse Owens through the Black arts movement, it completely reshapes how you might view these current political moves against cultural institutions.
Yeah.
It suggests it's not just about disagreeing with DEI policies. It's maybe about a much deeper, older fear, a fear of cultural self-determination and the power that comes with it, the power to tear down old myths about supremacy.
This analysis really reveals how those historical patterns, ways of controlling culture, might still be playing out today, and that what looks like an attack on diversity on the surface could actually be, according to this article, a kind of backhanded acknowledgement of the profound, even revolutionary power that culture has when it's wielded by people who've been pushed down.
So thinking about that, if culture really is this potent political weapon, as the article argues,
Yeah.
it leaves you wondering, how do we best protect it? How do we leverage its power for real social change, moving beyond just the politics of representation?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Something to definitely mull over. Thanks for joining us for this.